Hey everybody, and welcome to the Bellator 237 Dissection, where we're going to be taking a look at the main card of the Bellator event tonight, which is headlined by Fedor and Rampage. This is also kind of like a cross promotion. Not all the fights are, but some of them are Rizin versus Bellator. So that'll be interesting to watch too, right? I always think it's good when they do that kind of shit, just because you kind of get a feel for who the real players are, and like it kind of gives you, it's fun. It's fun, man. It's fun to see who's. You always, and especially like when you get like top level guys, like I'd love to see like guys like Michael Chandler fighting in the UFC, right? So this, you don't get to see this quite on the same level, but you do get to see like a little bit of what happens when this promotion fights this promotion, right? And it's kind of like a little competition, etc. Anyway, though, right before we get into breaking this main card down, and this podcast is probably going to be pretty brief, guys. I just got back to Denver from Pennsylvania. I traveled back home to see family and shit for Christmas and the holidays. And haven't had a lot of time to work on the podcast, but I did watch, like, it's hard doing these Bellator ones just because, like, when I do a lot of the UFC ones, I've said this before, but I'm so much more familiar with the UFC fighters just because I watch it more often. I've been watching it since I was in, like, 8th grade, right? So I'm more familiar with a lot of the fighters. And so I probably make, like, more educated guesses just because I have, like, a lot of, I have, like, a lot of the fighters' history in my subconscious probably impacting things, you know what I mean? Whereas with these guys, like Michael Venom Page, like I know, Michael Chandler I know, Rampage I know, Fedor I know, but like actually there's quite a few guys on here that are UFC veterans that I have a like pretty good feeling about and stuff, but a lot of these guys like Goiti Yamauchi, these are guys that you kind of got to study and you kind of got to go through, and it's hard to find footage for a lot of the fights on them and stuff. So I'm not sure how this is going to go. It might be a little bit rough, but the reason I'm trying to do these Bellator ones is just to like appreciate the sport of MMA as a whole, as opposed to only doing ones about the UFC just because it's more popular, right? So I'm trying to branch out into Bellator and one. Like I've always, like I said, I watch it when it's on and I know who like the top players are, right, in Bellator. And I know who some of the top players are at like ONE FC. And I know who like a lot of the guys in the UFC are, but I mean, a lot of like when you see a lot of picks and stuff and a lot of, I'm not saying that like I'm a pro at any of this, I'm obviously not, but a lot of guys like are not going to break a Bellator card down. So I'm trying to break into that space a little bit and just give my opinions on what I think's going on. Anyway, enough fucking rambling. Oh, before we get into breaking down this main card, I want to talk about UFC on ESPN Plus 23 because I made some predictions on that card and they were all fucking wrong. The only fight I got right was Kyung Ho Kang. He won via split decision, and wasn't this like crazy entertaining performance, and it wasn't that dominant. I mean, he was able to take the fight to the ground, and he wasn't able to do a whole lot there. Da Un Jung was probably the fight that I got the most wrong when I broke it down, because I said that Mike Rodriguez was going to come out firing, and I thought that he would have an advantage. And a lot of the times you do see this, right? Like you do see early on in fights, the guys who have a lot of power tend to have the advantage. And I really thought that with his precision and his length and that power that he'd be able to capitalize early on in the fight, and that it would take Da Un Jung a little bit to get warmed up. And Da Un Jung comes out and knocks him out with the right hand in the first minute of the fight. So way off on that one. Jun Young Park versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Barriault, I thought, would have an advantage in the grappling department. And admittedly, I was like in and out of these, right? I was falling asleep at times. Like it was like 3 a.m. for me, so I'm on the couch like trying to keep my eyes open. And I woke up for this one because I thought it was a really interesting matchup. And I remember seeing Park either go for and have some like mild success or land a takedown. Admittedly, I'd have to go back and watch that fight over, right? But as soon as I saw that, I like fell back asleep. And I was betting on the fights all night, and it was funny because I told my fiance, I was like, I have a really good feeling about these fights. Like I'm gonna lay some money down, and I was wrong about all of them. That's always how it fucking goes, right? But when I saw him shoot that and like get the takedown, I was like, God damn it, well, there goes that one. Because I know that Park's striking was really fucking good, and that if he controlled the middle of the octagon, it would be a long night for Marc-Andre Barriault. He's really precise, and he throws punches and bunches. He's really good. And then when I saw him controlling the grappling exchanges, I was like, well, fuck, there goes that. There goes that theory, Who else was on? Oh, maybe the biggest upset of the night. Definitely the biggest upset of the night. I don't even want to say maybe. Doo Ho Choi get knocked out by Charles Jourdain. And Jourdain looked brilliant in that fight. You could see that like when he fought Green, like Sorry, if you guys hear me sniffling constantly, I think I'm coming down with a cold. But Jourdain, he looked so much more controlled. His footwork looked so much more fluid. He was mixing things up. He was keeping Choi guessing. And he showed you that he has some real power and he can hurt you, right? And Doo-Ho Choi kind of he got some holes in his game exposed. You know, he has some real work to do on the defensive striking aspect. And I don't want to take anything away from Charles Jourdain and his victory because, like I said, he looks brilliant and he looks like he could potentially be a top contender at 145 pounds. He fights really well out of both stances. He had a great game plan coming into this fight. But you got to wonder with a guy like Doo-Ho Choi, whose last 2 fights have been against Cub Swanson and Jeremy Stephens, right? He's now suffered 3 losses in a row. You got to wonder where his headspace is at, right? Like, what's going on with him? Because a lot of the times, and here's what happens when young guys, not all the time, and they all respond to it differently, but when you run into an elite level fighter and you're used to throwing things and finding success with it, like Doo-Ho Choi has knocked out how many guys in the first round, right? When that doesn't happen anymore, you can start you're guessing yourself because you're throwing things at these guys, at these veterans that they've already seen, and they're able to return fire. So you've got to wonder, like, was Doo-Ho, and he seemed a little timid to me in this fight. So, like, did the fights with Stephens and Swanson make him second guess how good he is at implementing his offense? Because when he was trying to implement offense against a guy like Stephens, he was facing the consequences of it because Stephens was reacting and throwing stuff, you know, landing shots on him. And whenever he backed Stephens up against the cage, he just didn't look like the same Doo-Ho Choi to me. And you get a lot of guys who are young, like Cody Garbrandt, who bite down on the mouthpiece and get too committed to what got them to the dance, right? Like Cody Garbrandt has knockout power in boxing, and he'll just start throwing. He's been throwing recklessly, man, to try to, you know, pick up these wins. And then you see some guys like Choi who it's like they take their foot off the gas a little bit, like they kind of forgot what got them to the dance, right? So when you're young, I think that you have to be careful with how you book young fighters, right? Because they're very fragile. And personally, looking back on it in hindsight, I don't like Doo-Ho Choi fighting Jeremy Stephens after he just fought Cub Swanson. You know, I think that it's dangerous, man. And we'll talk about this a little bit in the main event, but you got to be. It can really disrupt your career. And I mean, he took a 2-year layoff. Doo-Ho Choi took a 2-year layoff and everything, but man, he just didn't look like the same person to me. And that could very well be because I wasn't there. I'm not in his head. I don't know what's going on, right? But it very well could have been because Jourdain was just confusing him. But he looked more afraid to pull the trigger and more afraid to put the pressure on. You got to wonder how fights against dangerous veteran guys like that, what kind of impact they have on you mentally and your approach to fighting, right? Anyway, Alexander Rakic lost to Volkan Ozdemir via split decision. Again, this was a fight that I was kind of in and out for, falling asleep. And I really thought that this fight was going to end in a knockout one way or another. So I was wrong on that. I thought that Volkan Ozdemir, if he could close distance and get in, you know, kind of take away the space from Rakic, that he'd be able to get a knockout. And I thought that Rakic might be able to, if he could control it and keep Ozdemir on the outside, he'd have a big advantage because of his length and his power. But goes to a decision. And then in the main event, and this is one where I let my bias kind of impact my pick because I love Frankie Edgar, right? And Korean Zombie just dotted him up, man. And Frankie Edgar is one of those guys who I knew that when I was watching the fight, I knew Frankie was in trouble when he started shooting for takedowns because Frankie is a guy who's very content to stay on his feet and box because he's never going to force them. Like Frankie doesn't shoot takedowns unless he's hurt or something out of desperation. He's very content with boxing with you staying on the feet and then taking them when they come and when the opportunity is right. So couple the fact that Frankie Edgar couldn't get the boxing going with the fact that he wasn't able to set up the takedowns, and I kind of knew he was going to be in for a long night because Chan Sung Jung has great takedown defense, great striking, and great grappling. So if you aren't the one implementing offense against him, It's gonna be a long fucking night, man. And like I said, as soon as I saw him start like shooting for takedowns that weren't really there, I was like, oh, he's got his number. And sure enough, he hurt him. And then when he got on top of him, got to show you just how terrifying his grappling is. He is smothering. He leaves you no space. He's raining down punches. He's controlling you at the right times. He's moving, advancing position at the right time. Terrifying. And after that win, and it was a brilliant win, he's looking like one of the best guys in the world at 145 pounds right now. A fight against Brian Ortega is one that I want to see. And now you've got a change of hands with the title with Volkanovski just beating Max Holloway. So, yeah, man, I'm really interested to see if the Korean Zombie can make a title run. He looks to me, just with his hand speed and just his approach to the game and his confidence, better than he's ever looked at any point in his career. He looks really fucking good, and I'm excited to watch him going forward. Good win for the Korean Zombie. All right, let's move on to this main card. And like I said, don't hold these picks against me, right? Because when I pick like UFC fights, I've been exposed to so many more of the fights. So I think it's a little bit easier because I'm making picks like I don't have to study a whole bunch of film for a lot of the fighters. Like when I watch Frankie Edgar fight, like I'll go back and review his last few fights and try to pick up on some things and figure out how to match up well against this guy, right? But I've also just got a library of fights in my head for him. So like it's a little bit easier for me to make decisions about what he's good at just because I've seen so much more of it, right? That makes sense. With a lot of these guys, and there are some exceptions like Lorenz Larkin, right? I've seen quite a few Michael Chandler fights, a lot of Rampage fights. But with a guy like Goiti Yamauchi, for example, who's going to be fighting Darren Cruikshank, it's tough, man, because he's a young guy and he has a ton of fights, but it's hard to find a lot of footage on him and a lot of, I have to like study them without having any background on them, because it's tough, man. It's tough. There's so many fights like Conor Watanabe where I'm looking for Horizon fights and I can't find anything at all. And I can get on like MMA Core, I think it's like a website that shows a whole bunch of like, but I need a VPN to get there, right? And I'm fucking cheap, so I don't want to pay for a VPN every month. But if I'm gonna break into this space and start doing more Bellator, more ONE FC, blah blah blah, I might just need to fucking suck it up and get one. At any rate, I'm gonna do the best I can on these, so hang with me, right? First fight on the card is Goiti Yamauchi versus Darren Cruikshank. Darren Cruikshank obviously is a UFC veteran. And never really, when he was there, man, he had an okay run, but never really won a bunch of fights. I think he won like 3 or 4 fights in the UFC before he was released. Before he left the UFC, he suffered 3 losses in a row to Beneil Dariush, James Krause, and Paul Felder, right? He's lost to Jorge Masvidal in the past. So this is a guy who has definitely seen high-level MMA competition, right? And this is one of the factors that you have to consider when you're fighting a guy like Goiti Yamauchi. By the way, this is going to be one of those like cross-promotion Rizin versus Bellator fights. I think that Darren Cruikshank is the first fighter to ever leave the UFC and go fight for Rizin, and I also think that he's the only American representing Rizin on this card, but he is also maybe one of the few Americans competing in that league in general. At least, I don't know. Anyway, regardless, extensive background in the UFC, right? Been there for a while. Lost a lot of fights, but he's been around the block, and he's a black belt in Taekwondo. Very good striking, but you watch his win over Roger Huerta where he landed that knee, and it's just the technique's not all there. Like, it's not as crisp, it's not as fast. It's not like when he throws spinning kicks, like, even though he's a high level black belt in Taekwondo, it's not like you're watching an Edson Barboza throw spinning kicks, right? And when he lands them, it's not like they're like driving guys backwards or landing with a ton of power. They're more just like jabs and stuff. Now, he landed a flying knee on Huerta that knocked him the fuck out. And you saw him looking for that knee as he was getting pushed up against the cage at several points during the fight, sending it up the middle to kind of prevent the takedown and stuff. And Huerta, oh my God, it's not Roger Huerta. It's Roger Huerta just fought somebody else on the card. Diego Brandao. I think Sidney Outlaw just beat Roger Huerta, who's fighting later on this card. Sorry about that. Diego Brandao, he defeated in Rizin and with the knee. And he was looking for it for like I said, he was looking for it when Diego Brandao was shooting for the takedown, and Brandao faked the takedown up against the when he had Cruikshank up against the ropes and he landed a flying knee, knocked him out cold, right? But then he goes on to fight Damian Brown, takes a bad shot, ends up getting guillotined. And then, I mean, this is tough for me because, like, I can go back and watch all of Darren Cruikshank's old fights, right? But how much is that really going to help you if you're trying to break down fights from 2013, 2014, but you have to base it off how he looks now, right? So the only full fight that I could really find was the Diego Brandao fight. I saw highlights of the Tafik Musayev fight and Damian Brown, but for this one, I'm kind of going to have to look at stats, right? Like, 7 losses by submission makes me really nervous when he's fighting a guy in Goiti Yamauchi who has won 19 of his fights by submission. He's a high-level black belt, very good on the ground, has fought a pretty high-level contender in Michael Chandler. But if you're going to pick Darren Cruikshank in this fight, I think the one thing that, like, you might be leaning towards him, that might make you lean towards him, is the fact that he's a veteran. And I understand that Goiti Yamauchi has 28 professional fights, right? But when he runs into a guy like Michael Chandler and gets dominated the way that he got dominated, it makes you look at the rest of his record and go, okay, but how many of these wins are legit wins? Like, yes, you have 24 wins on your record. You have 19 submissions. But how many of those have come against high-level competition? Whereas Darren Cruikshank might have a lot of losses on his record, but they're all against guys that you know are proven to be legitimate, like Paul Felder, one of the best lightweights in the world, right? Beneil Dariush, very talented. Jorge Masvidal, obviously one of the best welterweights in the world right now. So, you know, you run into this thing where it's like, how good really is Goiti Yamauchi? And in this case, with him being young, being hungry, there is something to say for just pure experience. Like, just regardless of the quality of competition, if you compete a lot, getting used to that atmosphere and getting used to feeling that and just getting used to the adrenaline of a fight is important. And I think that just, you know, he's not lacking on the feet. I think his reaction time is going to be there. I mean, in a pure striking matchup, you might be leaning more towards Darren Cruikshank, but as guys start to get older, man, and take more punishment, I'm a lot of the times I'm going to lean towards the young guys in situations like this, especially when you got a guy as hot as Yamauchi has been. Like I said, I don't like the fact that Cruikshank loses most commonly via submission, and that's how Goiti Yamauchi tends to win. I hate to base it just on that statistic, but I really do think that, like, I don't think Cruikshank's going to be able to throw anything at Yamauchi that's necessarily going to surprise him. And I think Yamauchi is eventually going to be able to get to this fight to the ground and end it with a submission of some sort. Because like I said, on the ground, he's very talented. Like, you can't really base his skill and his ability on the ground based off his fight with Michael Chandler, because Michael Chandler is one of the very best in the world. But when you see him lose like that, it does just kind of like raise questions like, what's the quality of competition that he's been seeing? But anyway, I'm taking Yamauchi in this fight. I think he's got a good chance to win. All right, moving on to the next fight between Alara Jawani and Kana Watanabe. Again, really tough to fucking find footage on these people, right? Like, I've seen highlights of Watanabe. I know she's a high-level judoka. I know that Jawani is training with the Pitbull brothers, which is also where Henry Cejudo is training, right? And if you watch her fight against Beck Rawlings most recently, another UFC vet, her wrestling was on point, and her jiu-jitsu was very good. She was able to lock up a knee bar in the second round. And in a fight that, I mean, she pretty much controlled all the positions in the grappling exchanges. I mean, throughout the entire fight, she got reversed once, I think, put into side control, but that's when she was able to lock it. She was able to use that to get to the knee bar. So very well versed on the ground. And she's got a cool little promotional thing, too, where she's calling herself Arya Stark, and she's got a hit list, and she's crossing people off as she goes. So you tend to see a little bit more stuff like that in Bellator, right? Like with Rickles and the caveman thing, like you get to kind of play into this. It's accepted to play like a WWE style personality a little bit more almost. So she's got that going for her, and if she can keep crossing people off the list, she can work her way up the title contention. But to be completely on, don't go place. I wouldn't recommend doing this anyway, but don't go placing money on this fight based off what I'm about to say. I think Watanabe is going to be able to control this fight and get the win. Just because I think when so often, and I mean, Joanny proved me wrong in the Beck Rawlings fight, right? But so often in grappling, it's about who can get top position. And leg locks in modern day, like jiu-jitsu and stuff, as it makes its way into MMA, that's slowly starting to change. But when you have a high-level judo player in Kana Watanabe, I'm going to take that just because, like, she has a specialty in something. And I think that when they get into grappling exchanges, she might have some control there and be able to dictate where the fight goes and put it on the ground. Again, this is a complete fucking guess. Don't take this pick too seriously. I genuinely don't know. I was able to watch maybe like 2 fights combined for each of these fighters, so it's a difficult pick. But yeah, I'm going to take Watanabe just on a coin flip. All right, moving on to the next fight, and I think Lorenz Larkin missed weight for this. He's fighting Kita Nakamura, who is another UFC veteran. And, you know, I mean, Kita Nakamura is... This is the problem that you run into in Bellator, though, right? Like, when people make the argument, like, don't get me wrong, Bellator has some very elite fighters. But you have a tough time getting quality matchups on every single card. And in my honest opinion, and I mean, it's MMA, anything can happen, I don't think this is a very competitive fight. I think that, like, let's go back through the UFC record of Kita Nakamura, right? Gets a win over Li Jinglong. Actually, that's a really good fucking win. I might have to eat my words on that. The Leech is a really good fucking fighter. Loses to Tom Breese. Wins against Kyle Noak. Loses against Zaleski dos Santos. Very good. Beat Alex Morano. Loses to Anthony Rocco Martin. So he's alternating wins and losses throughout his entire UFC career, right? And then you get a guy like Lorenz Larkin, who has a win over Jorge Masvidal, who, when he fought Neil Magny, battered him. His kicks, just like front kicks, leg kicks, devastating. Very good striker, very dangerous. Has fought some of the top guys in the world. This, to me, is just one of those fights where, like, if Lorenz doesn't win, it's going to be very, very, very surprising, right? Like I said, I just think he's world class. I think he's one of the best 170-pounders in the entire world, regardless of what organization he's fighting in. And I think this is a mismatch. I don't think if both of these, this is, I guess, like the point I'm trying to make with roster depth and stuff, right? If both of these fighters were on a UFC card or on the UFC roster, they would never fucking fight each other unless Lorenz Larkin went on a serious skid. So when people talk about how the UFC really is, it's the best. They have the most depth, and they're able to put together the best matchups based on that depth. Like I said, these two would never fight. I'd be much more interested in seeing like Lorenz Larkin fight Michael Venom Page on this card. But the problem is that when you make fights like that in Bellator, when you don't have a lot of depth, you run out. So they're doing what they can. I'm a Bellator fan, by the way. I think they've got some, like I said, they have some of the very best fighters. It's just hard for them to consistently make top-level interesting fights. And to me, this isn't one of them. I think that Lorenz Larkin is going to go out and put on a show. I think he's much more efficient. I think he's much more powerful. And I think he's going to get a finish in this fight. I think he's going to walk out of this with, which is, by the way, is something that since getting into Bellator, he's kind of struggled to find the finish. He's almost had it at certain points. But, yeah, man, I just think it's going to be overwhelming for Kita Nakamura. By the way, though, I do want to point this out. Like, you got to shine some light on some like of the really good fights that Bellator has to draw attention to it, right? And go back and watch his fight against Andrei Koreshkov, Lorenz Larkin's. What a fucking war! I mean, Koreshkov lands a spinning head head kick, like, and you think that Lorenz Larkin's going to go out, right? And he's hurt badly, stands up, and then Larkin returns like a left hook, and they go back and forth, and then Larkin picks up, in my opinion, what was a 10-8 round, hurt him really bad, had him in real trouble. Great fucking fight. I thought it was a split decision win for Larkin, but I kind of thought it was a draw. Now, that's an example of like two high-level guys going at it. And so if you guys – the great thing about Bellator, though, is like a lot of their fights are free. Like you can just get online, search it in, and go to their website, and they'll have it posted for you. So I would recommend Look up Lorenz Larkin versus Andrei Koreshkov. Great fucking fight. Both guys get hurt. A lot of resiliency and it just speaks testament to what a warrior Lorenz Larkin really is to fight through some of the adversity he faced in that fight. All right, moving on. We have Shinsho Anzai versus Michael Page. And, we're running into the same fucking thing here. Look, Shinsho Anzai is a guy who had a little bit of success in the UFC. I think he went like 2-2. But he's fighting Michael Venom Page. His only hope is to wrestle him. Watch me say that and watch Anzai go out and land some big hook or something. But goddamn, guys. The odds of him winning this fight to me are just so goddamn low. Like, he might go out and wrestle him but I don't, even if he does, every round has to start on the feet. And I think even if he takes him down, MVP is going to have what it takes to get back to his feet or survive until the next round. And I just think that, like, with his ability to control range and, his understanding, he's such a high-level striker. This is just such another major mismatch to me. I've got Michael Page. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, to be honest with you. But unless Shinsho Anzai comes out and can, really push this fight up against the cage, which I don't think he'll be able to do, because I think that you get a lot of guys, right? And sometimes you might not have the, like, okay, an instance of like a good example is like Conor and Khabib. If they get into a kickboxing fight, Conor's probably going to win 9 out of 10 times. But in MMA, when you have a specialty in something, it can open up doors for other opportunities. Like, Khabib is such a good wrestler that Conor was so concerned with the takedown that it opened up the overhand right for Khabib, right? Stuff like that. I just don't think that Anzai has the overwhelming, like, wrestling presence that's going to put Michael Page in any type of real danger. If he had like don't get me wrong, I know he's a solid wrestler and he's good, but it's not Khabib-like, and without something like that, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot for Anzai to offer in this fight. I've got Michael Venom Page winning this thing within 2 rounds. And to be honest with you, I think it's just going to be like, how long before MVP decides that he wants to put this guy away? I think he's going to come out, establish the range early. It's going to be hard for Anzai to get this fight up against the cage because Michael Venom Page's footwork is just so good. He's not going to be able to get on shots because he's not going to be able to set him up with the hands first. And like I said, he just doesn't have that, like, overwhelming, terrifying wrestling ability that makes me think that he's going to be able to open up the striking against a guy like MVP. I've got MVP in this one. This next fight is a fight that I think odds makers have a little bit too strongly in Michael Chandler's favor. I'm picking him to win the fight, but he's fighting Sidney Outlaw. And speaking of Khabib, Sidney Outlaw is the guy that Dustin Poirier brought in to help prepare for Khabib in his fight. Very strong grappler. Most recently defeated Roger Huerta, who I fucked up earlier with the Darren Cruikshank thing. Right? And this is a good fight, man. A good fight between two guys with pretty similar styles. Yeah, it's Michael Chandler, though. And Michael Chandler is one of the very best 100. This is going to take place at 160 pounds. I'm pretty sure it's the catchweight bout. But Michael Chandler is one of the best lightweights in the world. And to be honest, I was disappointed when he didn't sign with the UFC. He's a guy, after you watch his wars with Eddie Alvarez and stuff, he's one of those guys that I really wanted to see, like, what's going to happen when don't get me wrong, Chandler suffered losses throughout his career. But to me, that doesn't change the fact that he's one of the best in the world. And I really wanted to see what happens when he fights guys like Justin Gaethje, right? What happens when he fights guys like Khabib, like with the strong wrestling? Because he has such a strong wrestling base, and he's so athletic, and he is good with his hands, and he is well-rounded. Like, I just think that, like, Sidney Outlaw's been on the Contender Series and stuff, right? And done some good work against some good guys, but it's just like Michael Chandler's body of work to me is so much more impressive. And to me, this is a fight where I'm picking Chandler because I've seen more of him. Like I said, I think he's seen the higher level competition. He's proven himself time and time again. I do think he's one of the best in the world, but this is like a prove yourself fight for Sidney Outlaw. If he can come out here and shut down some of the things that Chandler's good at, it'll be a big fucking deal. But I just think that it's going to be a lot to overcome. And if he does, I mean, you're going to be looking at a new threat at 155 pounds. I mean, a guy that the UFC has obviously showed interest in by bringing him on. They see potential in him. His story is extremely inspiring. So, I like both guys. So not necessarily rooting for one or the other, but a Sydney Outlaw can go out and I don't even think he has to beat Chandler. That's the thing. Like, for him to make a big name for himself, if he can go out and just have a great fight against Chandler and show that he's not going to go out and get pushed around and bullied and dominated, it'll push his career forward. If he goes out and gets dominated, a lot of people are going to be like, oh yeah, he's fighting Michael Chandler. I expected that to happen. But if he can make this fight competitive, if he can win, it's going to be a big fucking deal. It's going to be eye-opening to a lot of people at 155 pounds. But if he can even go out and make it competitive, this fight's a win-win for him. Gets him some exposure against, like I said, one of the best lightweights in the world right now. And it's a fight that he's not supposed to win. So if he can go out and win or at least look competitive, I think it does a lot of good things for his career, and it'll show him, like, even if he doesn't, it's going to open his eye up to what it takes to compete with the very, very best. The very best in MMA. All right, and now we're moving on to the headlining bout between Fedor Emelianenko and Rampage. All right. Rampage looks like he consumed another human being. He is a completely different person. He is huge now. And, he goes out, he knocks out Wanderlei. He loses to Chael Sonnen. Fedor beats Chael Sonnen. I mean, I said this earlier in the podcast, but I'll probably clip this part, right? So I'll say it again. I was reading on, I think it was a Wanderlei and Rampage fight. One of the comments said, Bellator does such a good job of I'm paraphrasing, but of putting on all the fights that I want to see, but that should never happen. I don't know, man. I mean, I do have a conflict, right? Where it's like, what do you do? Because you do want to watch them. They're legends in the sport. I mean, Fedor and Rampage are legends. Like, Rampage is a UFC Hall of Famer, in my opinion, and Fedor is obviously one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Greatest heavyweight for sure that never fought in the UFC. It's tough, man, so here is like a little caveat to that. When you watch Fedor fight Chael Sonnen, he ragdolled him. I mean, Sonnen wasn't able to do really anything with any amount of success. There was a clear power difference. There was a clear difference in the hand speed. And it was obvious that Fedor was a heavyweight. And this is what makes me nervous for Rampage. I think that Rampage, and I love Rampage. Rampage was like one of my first favorite fighters. But Rampage is a lightweight or a light heavyweight who got fat. Do you know what I mean? Like, they were talking about with like TJ Dillashaw's trainer, that Sam Calvillo, I think I'm saying that right, but they were talking about how they want to get him down to 205. And it's like, yeah, because that's where Rampage is supposed to be. He just got a little bit chubby. And he still has power, but you're starting to see him fight behind the jab a little bit more, be a little bit more patient, try to open things up. And you're starting to see him shoot for takedowns and stuff, right? But in my opinion, I really think the deciding factor in this fight is going to be the fact that Rampage is a light heavyweight who has gained weight, and Fedor has always been a heavyweight. I think you're going to see that Fedor is going to have more power in his hands. Not that, I mean, don't get me wrong. When two guys, especially when they're as old as these two are, start swinging their hands around and stuff, like, it's so hard to guess how they're going to react to things and what they're going to find success with. But I'm leaning towards Fedor, man. I just think that his hand speed and the amount of power that he's going to – and like I said, when you saw him fight Chael Sonnen is a guy who probably belongs down at like 205 at this point in his career and 185 obviously throughout his prime, right? But you just saw that there was Fedor was just able to push him around and like he'd try takedowns times and Fedor was like, get the fuck off me. And Sonnen was able to kind of control Rampage. And that's because like I said, I just think that Rampage should be fighting at like 205. I think that you're going to see that get exploited in this fight. And not that Rampage can't, find an opening and land. Like, this could be anybody's fight. I mean, crazy fucking shit happens, especially when heavyweights are fighting and especially when two guys this old are fighting. But I think that Fedor, considering where he's at in his career, has looked pretty goddamn good lately. And I just think he's going to overwhelm Rampage. I think the power is going to be there. The hand speed's going to be there. And I don't think that there's a lot that Rampage is going to be able to do in this fight to find success, except for land the big shot. And yeah, I think Fedor is going to finish this fight, man. I think it'll be within inside like the first 2 rounds. Rampage has been like covering up and stuff some, boxing, like I said, fighting behind his jab. If he can kind of be patient and stay defensive, and if Fedor comes out swinging, he might be able to wear him out and capitalize on some of the exhaustion. But in instances like this where you've got a guy who's put on a bunch of weight and he's fighting a heavyweight due to that reason, I'm going to take the true heavyweight, and I'm going Fedor Emelianenko first or second round KO. I'm hoping it's a fun one, man. And I hope Rampage goes out and proves me wrong. I hope it's a good fight. But yeah, man, I mean, this has been Fedor's weight class for his entire career. And like I said, Rampage is just moving up here because I think he's been eating one too many Twinkies. And no offense, Rampage. I love Rampage. But if I got to pick somebody, I'm picking Fedor. Like I said, I'm a fan of both guys, but should be a good fight. But I think that wraps this one up. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Hit the subscribe button if you like what you heard. Leave suggestions in the comments. Like I said, I know these Bellator ones, until I get like more familiar with a larger portion of the roster, they're going to be a little bit rough. Same with Ryzen and like 1FC if I do those. So stick with me through those. You guys got to understand that like I'm not doing this because I think I'm an expert. I do it because I'm a fan of MMA. I'm a white belt in jiu-jitsu. I have a lot to learn, but talking about these things and kind of putting my ideas out there and then getting feedback from you guys and like the community that comments on the stuff, that's big for me because it teaches. I mean, I had this one kid, I don't even know who he was, but he wrote a fucking novel on my prediction for Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski, and he was spot on, man. And like when I get to communicate, this is like a learning experience for me. It's fun. I mean, and like I say this all the time, everybody can pick fights. You got a 50% chance of getting it right. So I try to provide ways that like both guys can win and find success. And I try to learn from it after the fact. Like to me, this whole thing is not about getting the fights right or wrong. It's about having fun with it, enjoying the sport. And like I said, learning from the community and all of you guys. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who know a lot of shit about MMA, right? I mean, it's getting more mainstream now, but so many of the people who follow it are such like diehard fans that they have unique perspectives on things that I might not have had. So that's the fun part for me. Don't take my picks so fucking seriously. Like I said, I'm not credentialed. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just a fan who watches a lot of fighting. And like I said, I practice jiu-jitsu. I do like a little bit of kickboxing here and there, but man, it's just like, and I guess there's the argument that you shouldn't be talking about it if you're not a pro, right? But I don't think so. I think like if it's something that you want to learn about, it just kind of makes sense to do it now and learn as you go, right? Like to me, my point is just don't take my shit too seriously, right? Don't get too wound up in it and like, oh, you got this pick wrong. No fucking shit. I'm here to learn. I'm here to have fun with this. So anyway, check out the new website. Go to mixedmartialanalysis.com. That thing's a work in progress. I'm trying to get everything running to where it's like a fine oiled machine, right? And it's hard. Like you got to stay consistent with things. So be patient with me. I'm trying to roll these out more religiously. Like I said, subscribe. Thumbs up, thumbs down, leave comments. Let me know who you guys think is going to win. And I'm hoping to roll one of these out tomorrow. Well, the Eagles, I'm an Eagles fan, and they play tomorrow at like 11. So I'm hoping to roll one. I probably won't roll the results of like this fight card out until after the game's over. And I'm aware that the Eagles are probably going to lose in the first round, even if they do beat the Giants. But still a fan, still got to support them. So I'll try to roll out the Aftermath podcast episode shortly after the game. And yeah, I think that's it. Sorry for rambling there at the end, but thank you all for tuning in. It means a lot. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.